The Sicilian Defense. You ever heard of it? It's been played by all the greats. Hikaru, Magnus, Garry Kasparov, they all love it. Today I will show you how to play the Sicilian and give breakdowns for different variations. Stick around because I will be showing some traps that have won me many games. Before we talk about any variation specifically, let's start with this position. This is the starting position of all Sicilian defenses. The Sicilian is an opening that you can play after white plays e4, and you're playing black, you decide to go with c5. Why is c5 a good move against e4? Well, the idea is very simple. White has played e4 and gained a pawn in the center. Black has a pawn on the flank. What does a flank pawn do? Well, it's preventing white from getting another pawn in the center uncontested. So the c5 pawn is controlling the d4 square, preventing white from playing d4 without having the queen come out and not having two pawns in the center. So you leave a lot of flexibility open for what you can do with your central pawns, as well as controlling the center in a more indirect way. And the Sicilian defense also creates an imbalance in the position immediately. When you play e5, for example, you've got a very symmetrical looking position, and the position can become very stale and drawish. When you play the Sicilian, you're controlling the center with an asymmetrical move, and the game can become a lot more about attacking your opponent than it is about making equal moves and trying to maintain a slightly symmetrical position. So the Sicilian creates an imbalance immediately, and that can play to your strengths. And when we talk about the Sicilian defense overall, we talk about a few different variations that all the sub-variations stem from. And they all start with white's next move. White's next move in this position, there's a few different ones that are very popular. Usually it's one of the knights, c3, or d4. Those are the main moves. So let's start with the most popular, especially at the highest level, knight to f3. Now, the most popular main line for white in the Sicilian is called the open Sicilian, where white plans to strike with d4, so they prepare the strike with first knight to f3, and then black plays whatever move they're going to play, and then white is going to play d4. And this is how most Sicilians go at the highest levels especially, and we call this the open Sicilian. So I'll just make a move for black, like d6, and then white plays the open Sicilian, captures, and then black plays whatever move they're going to play here. So when white plays this scheme of development, knight f3 and then d4, we call that the open Sicilian. Now, when white decides not to go with their f3 knight, they decide to go with their knight on c3, we call this a closed Sicilian. And there's a few different ways that white can play the closed Sicilian, and black can respond in a bunch of ways too. For example, black plays e6, and then white plays g3. This is the traditional closed Sicilian. So in the closed Sicilian, traditionally, white is going to fee and counter their bishop, develop their knight, and castle short. And white is going to play for a kingside attack, kind of like how you would in a King's Indian attack or King's Indian defense. Basically, you're going to attack on this side of the board. You're going to use the pressure from your bishop as well to attack. Then there's another variation of the closed Sicilian where white decides to play a move like f4. We call this the Grand Prix variation, and basically, you see all these arrows popping up. White is going to launch an amazingly strong attack against black's king, and black is going to try to play for the queen side, attacking with these pawns and trying to parry white's threats on the queen side through a counterattack. So that's the Grand Prix variation. It's very, very aggressive, and you should watch out for it if you're playing black. Another very common move, especially at the lower levels, is c3 on move 2 from white. And this is called the Alapin Sicilian. This is an opening I've played myself a lot, and it is very, very interesting for a few reasons. First of all, the plan is very simple in the Alapin Sicilian. Notice how before, if white were to play, for example, white were to play d4 in this position, black could just take, and white's going to have to take with the queen, and there's no pawn in the center. So the idea of playing a move like c3 is, now when you play d4, the pawn is going to be able to capture back, and white will still have two pawns in the center. So black has to act very quickly here in order to neutralize this threat of two pawns in the center. So black is going to traditionally respond with knight to f6 or d5, both moves of which are going to put another piece attacking white's center, and white is going to have to respond to that threat before they can play d4. So for example, you get knight to f6, attacking the pawn on e4. Pawn e4 is usually going to advance, and then knight to d4, then pawn d4, and we get takes, takes. And this is a very common position coming from the Alapin and Sicilian. Black is going to play d6 to challenge white's central pawn that's being annoying here. And this is a fairly equal position. So many people regard the Alapin and Sicilian as an opening that doesn't play for a serious advantage, but it can be very tricky from both sides. And if you mishandle it with white or black, you can easily find yourself in trouble. So it's a very interesting opening. I think it's something worth looking at if you're playing from the white side. But today we are talking about the black side of the Sicilian, and there's one more move that is very common, especially at the beginner levels, and this is called the Smith-Morra Gambit. Now, the Smith-Morra Gambit starts with that move that I showed you before, d4. And whenever you are offered the Smith-Morra Gambit, what I like to do is take, and people will usually not take back with the queen. Usually what they'll do is they'll offer you another pawn. They'll say, hey, I want to offer you another pawn. In exchange, I'm going to get an open file on the c file, a half open file on the d file, as well as my knight's going to be developed. And you will have no control of the center. So this position here is one of the main ones that comes out of the Smith-Morra, and I do not really like it for black. First of all, white has a knight developed and a pawn. Black's bishops are tied down, cannot be developed. Black's knights are going to jump out, but they can be knocked away. And these pawns, neither of them have been committed yet, but it's almost like we've traded away a lot of our time and our pressure, and now white has all the pressure. So I don't really like this position for black at all. Practically, it's the best chance for black. Like, black is better in this position slightly, but I do not like this opening for black at all, practically. So what I do here is I play knight to f6, and this is a cheaty way to get out of the Smith-Morra Gambit, because the best thing that people playing the Smith-Morra can do here is to transpose back into an Alapin Sicilian. So if you recognize this position, it is literally the same position we had before through the Alapin Sicilian. No differences. The only difference is we just came out of a different move order. So you can transpose back. If you play knight f6 here, their best move is e5. This position is not better for them because you're up a pawn. So that's what I like to do to combat the Smith-Morra Gambit as black. Now, let's get to the fun stuff. We've seen what white can do, and white has many options in these positions, but we're going to see what options black has when white plays the open Sicilian. Now, your second move as a Sicilian really defines you as a player, really tells what kind of opening system you want to play, and there's a few different ones. The most popular openings here most popular moves here for black are knight to c6, d6, and e6. And I'm going to explain each one of them. First thing is knight to c6. Knight to c6 is very nice because, first of all, you're getting your knight developed. It's going to a square you want it to go to for sure. And it can transpose into a lot of openings, so this is a very flexible move. The downside of this move, you allow a few variations of the Sicilian that are nasty. One being called the Rossolimo. This is the Rossolimo Sicilian. It's a very positional opening played very often at the high levels. And I do not like to allow it personally, which is the main reason why I do not play knight to c6. I do not like playing against the Rossolimo. It is an opening that I like to employ on the other side sometimes because it is really annoying to play against. White gets a lot of nagging pressure. White gets a slight tactical advantage as well. And it feels like if you're playing against someone with white who's really knows what they're doing, it's a really hard-fought draw if they play well. There's not that many winning chances for black in this kind of opening. So I avoid the Rossolimo. So I don't play knight c6. Now, why would you play knight c6? Well, knight c6 is a good move because when your opponent goes into this opening here, we call this the accelerated dragon. And the accelerated dragon is an awesome opening to play for beginners because it's almost like a King's Indian against e4. You're playing a Sicilian. You get your bishop fianchettoed to this long diagonal, which is going to create nagging pressure against your opponent the entire game. You're going to get your knight out. You're going to castle short. You're going to play you're going to play d6, and you're going to get your bishop to e6. So you're going to have all this pressure. You're going to play with the c file as well. Maybe sacrifice an exchange on c2. So you're going to have all sorts of easy development in this kind of opening, and the way you play is very simple. You're going to attack on the queen side with your pawns. Try to weaken white's position as much as possible. Almost reminds me of a English opening for white. So that's why you would want to play knight c6. Let's go over the other moves though. Now within knight c6 there are two other openings that are very popular besides the accelerated dragon, and they are called, first let's play d4, takes. In this variation, first thing you can do is play e5. This is called the Lowenthal or the Kalashnikov variation of the Sicilian, and there are very interesting lines coming from this position. First of all, one of the most popular moves is to just go for knight to b5 here, and the variations get very, very tricky very quickly. And this position is very, very volatile. The idea being, hey, you've played e5, this very weakening move, and you've given the square up for white to use in the center of the board. This is a very, very weak square that white is controlling, and is going to be controlling even more with this knight c3 move. But in return, you've gained greater control of the center, and you have a nice d4 square you can use temporarily. You've also got this f4 square that can be used to create an attack on the side of the board with a pawn break like this. There's all sorts of things you can do in this variation. It's very, very aggressive. So I like the Kalashnikov. I've never played it over the board, but I've considered playing it many times. And the other opening that comes from this starts with knight to f6, then we get knight to c3, and then we play e5. And this is called the Sveshnikov variation. Now, if you've ever heard of the Sveshnikov, you know a few things about it. One thing is, it is Magnus Carlsen's favorite Sicilian to play. It is his favorite opening to play in general. You'll see him playing it all the time. But yeah, it is also a very complicated opening with a lot of theory. Knight b5 is one of the moves. Knight b3 is a move. Knight back to f3 is also a move. There's many different moves in this position, and it is a whole bundle of theory. A lot of the theoretical battles of our age are fought in this kind of opening, and people who are really, really knowledgeable about chess can just study this opening all day and find out new variations, figure out what the best moves are, and it's just a fascinating opening. So if you like your pawn on e5 more than you would on e6 or d6, it could be an opening that you might be interested in. But then again, I would never recommend this to a beginner. This is a very difficult opening. Alright, so that was knight c6, and now we are going to go over d6. Now this is one of the most popular moves. A lot of Sicilian players play d6. d6 is the most popular move for black in this position. And there's a few different openings that stem out of this. This variation is very common. Knight to f6, attacking the pawn, knight defends, and then you play a6 here. And this is called the Najdorf Sicilian. This is one of the most popular Sicilians that exists in the whole world. Many, many players, grandmasters, even just regular chess players who aren't very experienced play this opening. And why is it? Well, it is known to be one of, if not the most aggressive chess opening in the entire game for black. Black has an amazing position here. There's all sorts of things that black can do. Of course, when you open the engines will say it is equal, but this is a very tricky position to play from both sides. Someone's going to checkmate somebody else in this kind of position. There is no doubt about that. And there's many ideas in the Najdorf. You can play the Najdorf in many different ways, um, and many things have been tried from both sides. As you can see here, um, it's a very mundane looking position at first, but when you open the Position Explorer, you notice that there's been thousands and thousands of different moves played in this position. Most popular move in this position is Bishop G5, but there's Bishop E3, there's F3, there's H3, H4, A4, A3, every single knight move you could think of. There's Bishop C4, there's Bishop D3, there's Queen F3. There's so many moves here that White could play, and White has tried just about everything in this position. Bishop E2, Bishop D2, just any move you can think of, it's been played in this position to try to stump this opening, and there's been nothing. There's always something you can find in the Najdorf, something you can play. As you see here, the most popular games played from this, most highest rated games played from this position. It's just every single grandmaster ever has games here. Fabiano Caruana, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, Ali Reza Firouzja, everybody has games here. And I do not recommend this opening to beginners. It is very, very difficult to play from both sides. And I think if you are going to play this opening, you need to study your variations, especially as black, because White can play any of those moves I just said, and it will be in a completely different line you've never seen before. And yeah, it is a fascinating opening to learn. And this opening here, instead of playing the Najdorf, you can play Knight C6 in this position, and it is called the Rouser or the Classical Sicilian. This is a little bit easier of an opening to play. You can play it in a whole bunch of different ways. Usually it involves playing E5, but you can play it with a fianchetto as well, or you can advance your pawns on the side of the board and get a fianchetto this way. Yeah, you can play the Rouser in a lot of different ways. And I think it's a very flexible Sicilian. Now, let's go to a different move on move 2, and this is the move that I like to play, E6. Now there's two main E6 Sicilians, and I'm going to show you them here now. Both of them involve after White plays D4, you take back, and whenever your opponent plays D4 in the Sicilian, you always are going to take with your C pawn. Of course, that was the real idea of why you played C5 on move 2, is so that you could disallow White from getting two pawns in the center, so you take. And here there are two very popular moves. First one is Knight to C6 in this position. This is called the Taimanov Sicilian. This is one of the most popular Sicilians, and it's the most popular one in E6. It is named after Mark Taimanov, who is an excellent player. He played Bobby Fischer in many different matches, and I love this opening for a few reasons. First of all, this pawn on E6, while it does block in your own bishop, it does blunt your opponent's bishop from ever coming to C4, and you get a really solid center here. Solid influence on the center. Your dark square bishop's going to be able to come out along this diagonal, and you don't have to deploy it on the fianchetto, and your knight can come out, everything's chill. Usually your light square bishop is going to be fianchettoed on this diagonal, and you're going to create some nagging pressure. Sometimes even convincing your opponent to play a drastic move like F3, just so their E4 pawn stays protected. So this is the opening I like to play. I've studied the Taimanov a lot, and there is so many different ways you can play it. So many different ways that White can play it, especially. There is a Maroczy structure with C4. There is the English attack with Bishop E3 and F3. There are Bishop E2, castle short kind of ways. There's castling long. There's so many different ways. This is almost like the Najdorf and how many variations there are. But it's a little bit less explored, and when you get beginners, especially, who play Bishop C4 all the time, you are going to have a superior advantage in this opening over a Najdorf because of the placement of your pawn. And the other main move in this opening is A6. This is called the Kan Sicilian. Now the Kan Sicilian is a very interesting opening as well in its own right. The argument is that you do not want to develop your knight to C6 immediately. Your knight wants to go out to D7, where it can redeploy to a bunch of different squares. And you're going to play a more defensive kind of structure, and you're going to wait for your opponent to attack you. You're going to make a strong counterattack. So you're going to play for your pawn advancing. A lot of the time, people play the Maroczy structure from White side in this variation. So C4 is a much better move in this variation than it was in the Taimanov. But you're still going to get some of the nagging pressure that you had in the other position, and you can really stay uncommitted for a long time and let your opponent make all of the weakening terrible moves, and you can capitalize on their weaknesses. So this is an opening if you like counterattacking, and if you don't like theory as much. There's not as much memorization required in this opening as, say, for example, the Taimanov Sicilian. And so, yeah, I think that this is something that you can go for, especially if you're brand new. Alright, so the first trap is within the wing gambit. Your opponent's going to play b4, and you're going to take. And your opponent may offer another pawn. Sacrificing 2 pawns is a way that many people play these kind of openings, and you're going to go for d5. You want to strike in the center. Opponent's going to take, you're going to take back. And the best move for white here is knight to f3, covering some key squares in the center. But many people, lots and lots of beginners, make this grave mistake. They take with the pawn here, but then your queen can slide over, give a check to the king, and you are going to win this undefended rook. So this is a very quick trap, and the first thing you need to notice is when your opponent plays b4, this diagonal is open up, and you are going to be able to exploit that with a queen or a bishop. Alright, and here we've got another trap starting in a closed Sicilian. Your opponent plays the closed Sicilian, you play knight to c6. Then we get knight g2, g6, d3, bishop g7, bishop e3, and knight to d4. This is a very common set of moves here, and your placement of your knight is very aggressive, and you can win a game very quickly here. And notice how your opponent's light toward bishop really has nowhere to go, and many people would just casually play g3, trying to fianchetto the bishop. But the weakening of the f3 square is too much, and there is checkmate in one move in this position, and this has happened many times to opponents that I've played against. And knight to f3 is checkmate due to there being nothing to take this knight, and the king has no squares to go to. And this is something that's typical of a lot of different openings when you play this move, knight g to e2, or in black's case, sometimes knight b to d7, or knight g to e7. There's lots of different things where the knight is blocking the one escape square for the king, and you're able to get a quick checkmate. So be careful of this trap if you're playing as white, and use this trap if you're playing as black. That's all for today, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please check out the rapid speed run. I'll link the video over here. And if you did enjoy this video, feel free to leave a subscribe and leave a comment down below. Tell me what you think. Have a great rest of your day.